So to recap, you're saying that there's a voltage delineation from 600 volts and up, that non-skilled labor is required for that, like a lineman classification? Is that what you're saying?
All I'm saying is that if you look in the labor code, and that is the section, that is the law that dictates the use of certified electricians by C10s. There is an exception that says all of Mr. Wetch's members and all employees of utilities, as well as any contractors they hire, they are not required to use, they can use anyone they want without restriction to work on high voltage distribution and transmission lines.
This is
That's
not-
in, well,
that's
you
not
might
correct.
want to look
Yeah,
at
yeah.
That's not correct.
108.2.
I represent the California utility employees, and I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah, that is not, that
please
is
do.
way
Yes.
not correct.
Yeah, no, the reason they're not covered under the certified electrician is because it's specialized work. It's not the same work. So the certified electrician, requirement isn't applied to them because they go through their apprenticeship programs, which give them 8,000 hours of apprenticeship training and on-the-job training and classroom training in which they actually learn this job and they learn the special skills and they have the training they need in order to do the high voltage work. It's different work, and that is why it's not covered
Yeah,
under
there's
certified
actually,
electrician.
there's classifications for those voltages, 60 and 50 and below, pretty much anybody.
So what you
From
guys are
50
saying is that
I'm
the
answering.
utility has specialized training internal to get their
No.
people ready to operate on those high voltages
Internal where?
safely.
Internal where?
Internal to the utility. The utility trains its own people to work on high
Are
voltage.
you-
Utilities,
no.
Is that wrong?
No,
utilities
utilities-
are signatory.
No, utilities
and have apprenticeship
employ
programs.
from union halls, people who are trained to work in that classification with a specific
They have
certification.
specialized
And to
training.
And to Donald's point, though, this brings
State
us back
approved
to what
through
we're
the
talking
DIR.
about. Let's bring back what
Not-
we're talking about.
not-
The certification requirements are
Yeah.
based on the commercial and residential application of electrical qualifications.
You've got-
That section of law was put into place to ensure that the consumers of the state of California, whether they're residing in a residence or in a hospital, or if they're in a school, that the electrical components of those facilities, the electrical connections were made by a qualified individual that
High
had the
voltage line
that had the
splicing.
had the applicable experience to do so.
Yeah, everything
And I
cuts,
think they should go back to school because that's where we're seeing the fires happen in this state.
yeah.
Well,
That's
can I make
so-
a point
so you're,
as a
so,
fire,
so
the fire
you're saying
department?
people that don't go to school are telling the people that have gone to school to go back to
You know,
school?
can I interrupt for just a
that
second?
what
I
you're
think
saying
it might
there?
be
Can we
great for
go-
you to have an
Wait, I
off-record
want to answer this
conversation.
question because it's a very simple answer.
Well,
It
this
all
is going to be
happens
the
at the
last
meter.
one though on this though, because we've got questions to ask. We actually have to put a study together. So I appreciate this, all this comment about electrician certification, but I think that's a separate subject.
Yeah,
You may want to go back and look legislatively at trying to change the law, but that's not what we're tasked for here. I'm very concerned that we're going to leave this meeting without having the data or the information that we need. I would like to ask Mike Chemnesky, who's going to have to write this report. Mike, do you have any questions on what you've heard?
Thanks, Dave. I guess I want to know, and because of my lack of technical expertise, I'm going to try to understand all of this from a lay's standpoint. There's a few things I'd like to know. I'd like to know what the 20% rule is and what the significance of that comment was with respect to this subject. I'd also like to know what the difference in knowledge and expertise and experience in electrical theory is between the installation of the lead-acid batteries 40 years ago and the lithium ions today, what the difference is there, why should there be a distinction. And I think, I don't know, it's a couple of thoughts I have. I'm sure I'll think of more as the discussion continues. I guess one point was brought up, there seemed to be, and I don't understand the technology of it, there seems to be an argument that the electrical connections that were made that resulted in the fires in those photos, the same risk that can occur there can occur whether you're installing PV without storage or PV with storage. So I kind of want to make that clarification as well.
Well, so I'll help clarify that one right there. Yeah, can a PV system explode? Mark? Yes or no? To explode? No. Can it catch on fire?
Yes?
Okay. Can a battery storage system explode?
It can.
Okay. Can it catch on fire?
It can.
Yeah. Okay, so there's your answer right there. You've got stored potential energy that has a totally different potential of explosion and hazard than PV. So when you couple storage with PV as an excuse to continue to expand your scope of work, you're really trying to reduce to the ridiculous the potential of hazard. A PV panel might catch on fire, but it's not going to explode.
We're asking hypotheticals.
Now, to
Can
put-
something or cannot? The only explosion
That's not a
and death.
hypothetical.
Well, let me just give you an example.
Can it or can it not?
The only explosion or death that I'm aware of that happened with an energy storage system in the United States was a system that was installed in Arizona behind the utility fence. To my knowledge, there's 0 problems that have happened with a lithium-ion battery installed in a residential system, other than perhaps one falling on somebody's foot. So that's the reality.
Let's talk about 1 megawatt systems. Have there been problems with energy storage systems?
The testimony you gave was about overloading electrical panels. That was the fire risk that you presented.
Overloading the whole system, not just the panel.
But can I ask you a
The
question?
whole system.
Do the electrons coming from the grid differ from the electrons coming from my energy storage system?
Yes. They're safety devices that are set to trip, and they're not containing energy, right? You've got a storage tank of energy on a property of various values that could potentially explode and
That
burn.
has safety parameters put around it.
So did I answer your question?
No,
I did.
you didn't. The
You asked the
electrons
difference between
aren't
utility
different.
power and storage power.
It's rhetorical. The answers
it's
aren't
not.
different. As far as that bus sees it, doesn't matter where the electrons are coming from a utility service or from an energy storage. You're talking about overloading a system. I'm taking power from an energy storage system, I'm combining it with a grid. Those
You're
electrons
drinking
are
the
still
Kool-Aid, man. You
electrons.
just keep
It's still
selling yourself on
electricity.
it.
Let's back up and do one
Yeah.
question at a time just to make it simple.
Yeah.
What is the 20% rule and why does it matter?
Okay, Mike. The reason I brought up that code reference is that it's just an example of many of the codes that apply to an electrical installation. And it is probably one of the most important when connecting to an existing system. And the code-making body realized the need for additional capacity on the bus because of past experience on existing systems, as they evolve over time, can be overloaded. And so then when a battery energy storage, an inverter, interactive system is installed, they must consider the whole system, do an evaluation, and make sure that that additional capacity exists before they interconnect. So it really was just an example of one of the many codes that govern that type of work. And it was to emphasize the fact that to understand those codes requires training and education.
And can I add that that rule is enforced at the local jurisdiction, and code compliance is verified. You can't just ignore this
I'd like to
rule
interrupt to
and
answer
get-
Michael's question, if I
and-
could.
and get a system installed and approved. You need to have an inspector approve the system from the local jurisdiction, and they will look at this for every system.
And I want to just reiterate that there's
And
no...
after you speak, I still would like to answer Michael's
I would,
question. If you're going to
um,
answer Michael's question, you
So
surely
there-
can go ahead.
Currently, the solar PV systems are allowed to overgenerate by 20% of the capacity of the panel. I will answer the question. So
Thank you.
the solar PV system can integrate at that panel at the bottom of the bus bar, opposite from where the interconnection of the utility is. So what happens is that the breakers in between those two would only see the maximum of the 100 amps that would be from the utility or the 20 amps that would be from the PV system. And I want to reiterate that as a C46 installer, we install to code following the code regulations. It's kind of, that's what they are there for. That's governed our behavior as far as that type of interconnection. We are not allowed to overdrive beyond the 20% rule.
Have you ever taken a code class? Have you ever sat in a code class, codology? Have you ever taken a code test?
I
Or
don't
is your
know if
code
this is about
is your
me.
code experience
So,
just about your own experience?
If you're going to continue
So
to interrupt,
can
I don't know how we're going to have a
this is-
productive
this is
meeting.
I'm trying to help, Michael, thank you. I do want to reiterate that that solar installers, C46 installers, are legally allowed to install up to very large interconnections, right? So I don't know the exact number of size, but we are currently allowed to install megawatts worth of PV onto existing electrical panels. And an energy storage system has very little difference in its interconnection.
Other than explosion.
But that's not in the interconnection, sir. The battery itself is a separate thing that's governed by its UL regulations. So that item needs to have, you know, its own regulations as far as like how that
That's
battery
why
is
we're here.
composed. And whether or not it is a solar installer or a C10 electrician, making those connections has no bearing on the explosivity of that chemistry. It doesn't matter. It's going to explode if it's going to explode, and it's not to UL, and they violated codes and regulations.
You
That's
really
not
should
what
be
we're talking
lobbying
about.
Underwriters Laboratories, not C46 licenses.
That is not correct, and I'd like to speak
I'd
to
like
that.
to have a shot too, so just let me know what's.
But I'll,
thank you.
I'll defer
Okay.
to Cliff. But
I
I'd like
don't
to
think
speak to
anybody
that.
answered Michael's questions about the difference between lead acid and lithium-ion batteries. If you had lead, you could put it in your hand. If you had a lithium, which is a metal, in your hand would burn up. When they developed a lithium-ion, have a bachelor's of science in chemistry, which makes me a chemist. I can call myself a chemist. Lithium is a very unstable metal. It's a very valuable metal, but that's what makes them dangerous. And yes, we've done a lot of testing. We mean collectively, a lot of testing to make sure that conditions are taken care of to prevent those from going and flaming.
Well, again,
See-
this is governed.
I think you're putting your life on your hand if you don't carefully take care of that thing.
This is governed
Michael.
by UL standards. The UL 1973 for batteries, UL 9540 for storage systems. And if you want to argue with UL and
I am not arguing UL. I'm
that's
speaking.
where
I'm
discussed
answering
about
Michael's
the safety
question
of the units
on
themselves.
a lithium-ion
So let's not mix two
battery.
issues.
I'm sorry for talking over you, but I'm answering as a chemist his question.
Michael, let
I'm
me.
not going into the UL label and that kind of things. I just testified that we have done a lot of testing. These things still have problems. Yes, don't be comfortable that you got this thing in your pocket.
Michael, let me
carry
answer
something
too. Let me
dangerous.
answer your question that lead acid lithium. So I've been a firefighter for 29 years, still am a firefighter. I do a non-profit and I teach thousands of California firefighters lithium-ion battery safety. I'm actually on my way to CAL FIRE this afternoon to teach a lithium-ion battery firefighting class to all the brand new rookies in California. I teach at ION and I teach at Ben Clark and I teach thousands of California firefighters lithium-ion battery safety. Michael, let me explain the difference. I lived off the grid in Nevada for 15 years, completely off grid on lead acid batteries. Everybody knows 6-volt batteries. They were series to 24 volt, which means you have 24 volts. And I had a bank of 16 of these batteries. Now, I lived off those batteries for 15 years. I had to change them out a couple of times because they went bad. But they don't have any battery management system. And how I explain to firefighters, fire safety is this. Lead acid batteries are very dangerous because, number one, they don't have a battery management system. And for you, that means, Michael, what happened in the old days was each battery was on its own, and it had a charge controller, but it didn't look at the cells in the battery. And the charge controller, the batteries would go bad on the cells, and the charge controller would go, this is a bad battery, and just stop dumping energy into these batteries. From a firefighter side of view, I lived in a community called Cold Creek where everyone was off the grid. I had 2 residential structure fires because of the batteries. The lead acid batteries actually burnt, shorted out, and caught the sheds on fire. Now with the lithium-ion battery, it's a completely new technology, and it's actually safer. And the reason you're seeing, and why we're here today is about safety. Now, I've been teaching this course for about 2 years, trying to play catch up with the deployment of the lithium-ion battery. And what I'm finding is this. I'm talking to chiefs across this state, talking to thousands of firefighters in a room sometimes with my 29 years experience and the rest of the guys in the room. I'm talking 1,000 years of firefighting experience. And I'm asking them, what are you seeing out there? This new product, what are you seeing? And they're saying, wow, Cap, we are seeing a safety record because we're not running into these problems. We're not seeing it. As I see it right now, your board and what you're tasked to do is look at the evidence of the safety. And right now, I've got to say, everybody in the room should stand up. And actually, I'm going to applaud everybody right now because of your safety record. It's fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic. I'm blown away by the safety record so far. And I'm looking at it and saying, how is it different? And that's where that lithium-ion battery comes in. You've got that lead-acid battery. It was old technology, and it was squirrely because, again, it didn't have that battery management system. I've done burn tests, $1 million burn tests, and I have looked at this material and what it does, and especially the battery management system, and say, our civilians, are your daughters going to be safe with that battery in their garage? And basically what I'm looking at is a brand new technology that looks at every cell, looks at what's going on in that battery. And what it does, and this is how I explain it to firefighters, it's like a bouncer in a nightclub. He's looking at everybody. So every one of those cells sitting in that battery is now monitored, not like the lead-acid batteries. So you have a much more technological advancement where each cell is looked at, it's nurtured, and what is happening is basically if there's a fault, they'll take that cell right out of the system, and it makes it, it improves the system. And the way the C46s have been installing this and the safety record of I've been looking for incidences where which worker, we've got 20,000 plus battery systems being put in between Tesla to the biggest. We've had thousands of systems put in. I'm looking, okay, where are these workers being hurt? Because we're going to have to run on them. Like early on in my career, I ran on a lineman, and I'll never forget it. And I followed that lineman through the trauma center, and he started losing limbs because they don't know the nerve damage. And I'll never forget this lineman. He died 3 weeks later. And I will never forget that call. I'm looking for the same thing. I'm saying the fire department, the EMS workers are responding to these calls. Where's the problem? Where's the worker? What do we have to look at? What do we have to see so we are safe so we can save that person working on the systems? And right now, I don't have evidence of that. I'm saying to fire chiefs across the state of California, okay, chief, where have you had these structure fires? Because like I said, with the lead acid batteries, I can just point to 2 in my community. I said, where are we having these fires? Where they're exploding, catching the houses on fires, or the buildings on fires.
Captain Burt, no, we get it. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate that. We've
Michael,
had a gentleman at the
Mike-
podium
yeah,
here for quite some time.
Did that answer your question,
I think he
Mike?
did that.
Thank you.
But I'd like for the gentleman at the podium to be able to speak. He's been very patient, so thank you.
Thank you, David. Kyle Bruning, okay to be recorded. Hi, Michael. I just pulled up UL 9540. UL is the Underwriter Laboratories standard for energy storage systems and equipment. I'm just on their first Google result page under scope, and it says the types of energy storage covered under this standard include electrochemical, chemical, mechanical, and thermal. So just highlighting for you, lead acid or lithium both would come with this UL standard. Your question on the 20% rule is one of a number of ways of sizing a PV, a battery, or other generation equipment on site. I'd like to highlight that the NEC, the National Electric Code in 2020 introduces new means and new technology as well to interconnect more larger sizes on smaller systems with appropriate technology that prevents overloading. So my point there is that technology is continuing to advance and make larger systems available on smaller, what used to be considered smaller service sizes or customer panels. And I'm trying to remember your third question. so that I could address it. Or if you have any other questions,
I think the third one was, it was brought up at the end of Mr. Kabibo's presentation with the photos and the overloading of the panels. There was a suggestion that that kind of overloading can occur whether you're doing PV with no battery or PV with a battery. What's the differentiation there?
Right, thank you. So there has been a discussion on the safety of batteries, and I feel like that is the safety of batteries as the unit themselves, and there has been a separate discussion on the safety of connecting generation sources. And these are two different topics. And I feel your question is about the connection of power generation sources, and I think that the presentation we heard highlights that these risks are present for power generation sources when connected. So that would be regardless of PV or battery system. Thank you.
Thank you. What I'd like to propose is maybe a 10-minute break, and then we would come back, and each industry could have somebody represent that industry with a closing argument, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, something that we could really take back and put in our report. Bernadette, Eddie, what do you think about that as a proposal?
And likewise, I had tried to respond to the testimony and was not able to complete. So it's just corrections in fact.
We're kind of going back and forth. I'm wondering if you could put in your closing statement, if that would be possible.
Has CSLB gotten all of its questions out? Because I think that's the most important thing, is to make sure all of your questions have been asked and answered.
Mike?
I just think
Christie?
whatever folks can do to give us evidence on one side or the other in response to the motion would be most helpful, because the regulatory standard under the law, when we have to get these regulations through OAL, we need facts to support any change that we're making, and we have to show that the change is necessary. What facts will demonstrate that the change is necessary with respect to the motion from the Ledge Committee?
So, Michael, real quick, I've heard this tried to be answered here. So the difference, one main difference in lithium-ion batteries versus lead-acid is about a 4-to-1 ratio of power in the same space. That's why you see lithium happening right now, right? You can put more batteries in smaller spaces. That's a key characteristic. Yeah, more energy, which makes it more inherently dangerous, right? And to the firemen, I appreciate what you do. I'm in the real world. I've done projects outside of the U.S., 3 military microgrids. I disagree with what you're saying, that I think you are looking at a battery energy storage system, and you need to be careful what you're looking at. So there's 2 large South Korean companies that make batteries, right? We have a project in Los Angeles, completely permitted, interconnected, SCE, all good. Not once, but twice has that company been there to make retrofits to that battery. Twice, to improve on the safety of that battery.
Apples and oranges, those aren't listed systems.
All right, so let's take a 10-minute
What do you
break
mean?
so you can put your closing statements together.
If you're asking
We can
what's
get
a
them by
listed
12.
system,
How do you know it's listed?
I know they're not listed. I know those utility interconnection systems are not listed because I research it. Same as the Arizona Surprise APS.
So you should
5
talk to
not
Mustafa.
listed systems.
Talk to Mustafa and see if it's not listed. He approved it completely. Huh? And? It's listed.
And again, I appreciate all of you coming in this morning and sharing your thoughts and comments. I do want to just reiterate why we're here this morning, and that is because the Legislative Committee of the Board has directed staff to prepare regulatory language to permit the C46 contractor classification to install battery energy storage system on specified residential units with restrictions. And really specific to this meeting is with the further recommendation that staff study ESS size, complexity, voltage, and risk, and bring this back to the committee. And again, all we're doing is we're putting together a study. That study will go back to the Legislative Committee. You would have an opportunity to attend that meeting, and depending on what they recommend, it would go to the full board. So again, this is fact-finding. and we appreciate all the input that you've provided. What I would ask is that you be respectful of the closing comments the comments the presenter will make, and that you hold your comments to 5 minutes. Now, there may be something said you disagree with. If you disagree with it, you'll absolutely have the ability to contact us later. Ideally, you'd put your comments in writing. We can make that part of the report, and we'll respond back to you as appropriate. So we all understand that. Again, I'd ask that you be respectful of the presenter. And we started with the solar industry, so Bernadette, do you have someone? Okay. Nobody wants to go first, but again, would this be 5-minute closing presentation?
Okay, Registrar Fote, I'd like to split my time with my colleague here, Brett Hebner, so he'll go first, and then I'll finish up.
Well, in terms of process going forward, there's one, first off, the distinction needs to be very clear, and I think the point has been made, Mike. I hope it really sank in directly in response to your question, that there's product safety, explosivity is all about that, and then there's electrical connections, right? Product safety, our manufacturers spend a lot of time figuring out how to comply with UL 1973 and UL 9540. That's tough stuff. There's a lot of engineers that put in a lot of hours to figure out how to do that, and then they're safe. So if you think those standards fall short, that's UL and IEEE. One thing we agree with the unions on is that when you interconnect a system, it becomes part of the electric system. And assessing the impacts of that is absolutely essential. We agree 100%, right? And that's where the National Electric Code comes in. National Electric Code that is enforced by local jurisdictions. You can't install something that's not to code, right? You need to know code. I talk to our installers all the time. Their talk is all about code. You know, they're studying the code, and that's the world they live in, because they won't be able to do business if the stuff is not up to code. It's in there. It has to be inspected and improved. And so the follow-up discussion I would like to have with the unions is where is there a shortcoming in the code where the problems that they relate as to the safety risks of electrical connections are not covered by code. And if there are some, we'd love to get into them, because it's a very important issue. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Brad. So I've got a couple of closing statements, closing points. One is the IBEW, NECA, and the Coalition of Utility Employees have made general statements as to the relative safety of electrical connections. The photos presented in the slides, presumably handed to you as well in a handout, are all about general electrical connections and safety issues. There is still, after 18 months of this issue being alive and deliberated here at the CSLB, there is no single piece of evidence that suggests that there is a problem to solve with regards to the installation of solar photovoltaics paired with energy storage, and certainly no evidence that suggests that the C46 as a classification is incapable to do this work as they have been doing, continue to do it safely and capably. So that is a point that just needs to be stated and restated. There is no evidence of a safety problem. Two, again, I just want to say it in really layman's terms on this whole energy density and lithium-ion versus lead acid. First of all, lead acid is still being installed today. So while it's an older technology, we still are seeing lead acid batteries out in the market. Lithium-ion is just one of the other alternative chemistries. There are plenty of others, or several others as well. The reason why people are really harping on this UL listing issue is because the safety of the box, of that battery box, is at 100% in the control of the manufacturer and the laboratories that test those products before they are allowed to go into the market. Where the purview of the CSLB comes in, of course, is whether the person that wants to hang a shingle and open up a contracting business is has the proper training and knowledge and capability to then install that UL-listed device. So the relative safety of the device is covered by the manufacturer, the laboratories, and then the code. If the contractor is capable of installing that product to code, it's going to operate safely. That is what our entire world is basically based on. That's why code is so important. That's why CALSA believes that permitting and proper inspections by authorities having jurisdiction is so important. You guys require, in order for somebody to sit for a C46 test, 5,000 hours of relevant experience to this specialty, just like we talked about the specialty work of high voltage line repairs and maintenance and construction, we also are a specialty trade. And in that work, we have to prove 5,000 relevant experience, and then we have to sit for a test that is entirely about solar and storage. And your own testing chief has testified to this board that the C46 test is more elaborate, more extensive on energy storage than the C10 test. So that person is qualified, and you have been licensing that person for 40 years to do this work. And that those people that are licensed have been doing it without incident. So that all just, I hope that clarifies why it matters that there are products being installed that are listed to code, that are UL tested or the other labs, and that are being properly interconnected to the grid. Second is the IBEW and the Coalition of Utility Employees, and I can speak to personal experience, have been trying to squash the C46 license and knock it out of business for at least 30 years, going back to 1995. And repeatedly, the CSLB has upheld its decision to create a specialty license and to allow for this multi-craft trade to exist and do this work of installing solar and storage systems. Repeatedly, you have upheld the ability for the C46 to do this work. The Coalition of Utility Employees are trying to knock out distributed generation. This is actually not a C10 versus C46 issue. And you guys know most of our contractors hold multiple licenses. This is about knocking out behind the meter, customer-sided, customers' ability to generate their own electricity by the Coalition of Utility Employees. We have not addressed size and complexity and voltage and risk at all today. They have not presented a reasonable line defining what should be and shouldn't be a safe threshold for the C46. We'd like to continue to talk about that. And then in conclusion, I want to just point out, I have 2 young children, 11 and 8. I care extremely deeply about climate change. I have spent my career on renewable energy and developing markets for renewable energy. California has a tremendous track record, best in the world, on installing renewable energy in a consistent, safe, and affordable manner. We are just getting started addressing this problem. Now is not the time to play favorites to one trade over another. And do I care that those systems are installed safely? Absolutely. Absolutely, I care. This trade association that I work for is the one that lobbied for this license to begin with 40 years ago. We care intensely about the safety of these products. We work with building officials almost on a daily basis in terms of developing and writing new code to make sure that the iteration of this technology continues to be safe. But to suggest that the tradesmen and women that have been installing these systems safely, effectively, cost-effectively for many, many years now are incapable of doing it and should have that market ripped out from underneath them is to basically harm California's ability to solve climate change and to give individual consumers the ability to keep the lights on during power shutoff situations, and as we go into a high fire risk situation where that's the new normal. We are going to harm consumers with this. We're going to harm California's ability to fight climate change. And I care very deeply about that, and I think that has to be very on the forefront of the CSLB's decision-making on this. And to restrict C46 contractors on the premise of residential versus commercial has no basis in fact, in any kind of reason, as we've testified here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the C10 industry, she went about 10 minutes, so you'll get 10 minutes. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go first, Tom Enslow. First, as someone who represents the California utility employees, I'm very offended by what was just said. California utility employees have been at the forefront of the renewable portfolio standard, care deeply about global warming and increasing the access to renewable energy. That's just completely wrong. To the idea that, well, we have UL listings and we have codes. Yes, we do. The issue is that there are always installation mistakes. I don't care if you're a C10, a C46, if you're install HVAC systems. We always see installation mistakes, and there's more installation mistakes the less training and experience someone has. And the fact is that you see you see listings for job listings for the C46 contractors. It's $10, $11 an hour, no experience necessary. Sure, they may give a little training, but there's no standards. There's no requirement for training. And so we are talking about an industry that pays people very little, gives them very little training, and there's going to be more mistakes. That's the concern. It doesn't matter if it's UL rated or what the code says if there's an installation mistake. And when there's an installation mistake, energy storage systems have greater risks than a solar PV system. And the larger the energy storage system, the greater the risk. And that's why we have these standards that have been set by the national and state code and standard setting bodies that go through numerous peer reviews, numerous comment periods, and they've come up with a 20 kilowatt hour threshold as to where the safety concerns really ratchet up. And that is in your record, and it's a standard that has already been set. You do not need to reinvent the wheel. I also like to talk about the idea that the C46 contractors are better trained to do this type of work. The fact is, a C46 contractor needs 5,000 hours of experience. There could be experience installing doing the roof rack work or doing solar thermal. There's no requirement that they have electrical experience. Sure, they can be trained to pass the test, but this isn't the same as a C10 contractor where you have 8,000 hours or 5,000 hours of experience actually in electrical theory and electrical work. And that really makes a difference when you're supervising workers, especially if they are not certified electricians. Obviously, I'm not trying to paint a broad brush on the whole industry, but there are a lot of contractors. There's more coming in there. There's more people coming in there that see this as a way to make money, that don't have the experience, and not every contractor is good under any licensing. So we need to really look at, where are the weak points in this. Let's see. And the last is this idea that this will, destroy their economy or rip apart the work of the C46 and not have enough people to do this very important work. And that's just not demonstrated by what's in the record. 57% of C46 contractors can already do this work because they have other licenses which allow them to do standalone energy storage work. So the vast majority of C46 contractors are not going to be affected by this decision. And 80% of the residential work is under 20 kilowatt hours. So the vast majority of that work, it's going to be business as usual. We're talking about the bigger, more dangerous systems and saying you need to have a classification that allows you to do electrical work, that you have that's what's important. And once you get to these systems that are at this point, they're no longer a supplemental system. They're their own standalone systems, their own standalone code requirements, and they need to be treated that way by the CSLB. With that,
Excuse me, this is Bernie Cotley. I'd like to take my portion of this to talk about
what has been stated over and over and over for many meetings, and I've attended these meetings for years, and I've heard many, many, many claims, and we've heard them today, that there's no evidence that there's any problem, and the inference is that solar workers do great work and there's been no problems. Well, the reason that that claim has been made is because there is no clear state reporting on solar contractors and solar workers and the problems that are associated, the faults, the violations, and all the rest. That's why they say this. They report under electrical apparatus. They report in mixed data sets. And so we could not establish that because the data wasn't readily accessible. But timing is everything, and what I've passed out today, and obviously I'm not going to read through it, but you have all the evidence of the suits filed by Walmart and Amazon against Tesla, one of the members, one of the most prominent companies in the business, also known as Solar City. And I'll just quickly read a couple of the quotes here. The Walmart suit says Tesla has untrained workers putting up shoddy installations and showing utter incompetence or callousness or both. Walmart suit also says Solar City has an ill-considered business model that required it to install solar panel systems haphazardly and as quickly as possible in order to turn a profit, and the contractors and subcontractors who performed the original installation work had not been properly trained, hired, trained, or supervised. And finally, Tesla failed to properly ground the systems to decrease the risk of fire. So how does this happen? We've heard the claims that they're UL-approved systems, that they're inspected, and that they have to meet code. So what happens in the real world? Number one is when you speak to UL, and I have extensively, they will tell you that those UL systems, those UL stickers say that they're safe when operated and connected properly, when they meet all the code requirements, when the system is properly inspected and all the parts of that system work properly. And I've asked UL engineers, if you connect a UL device that's been approved and you connect it to a system that has other faults, will it operate properly? And they say clearly, we only certify that piece of apparatus, not the whole system. And UL will testify to that, and has. Secondly, there's a claim here that all these workers know the code and they pass inspection, and that means that things work right. Well, a couple points there. First of all, during the Great Recession, a lot of jurisdictions in California went to combo inspectors. Many of the inspectors who were inspecting electrical work originally were plumbing inspectors or drywall inspectors or framing inspectors. Many of them don't have the electrical expertise, number one. Number two, we talked about the need for a site assessment of all the components in a system. A code inspector doesn't do that. They just look at what has been hooked up and whether that particular connection of that device is connected properly. They don't go through and do all that site assessment. They don't see the old wires in the walls. They don't see all the things that can cause problems. That's critical. So once again, we hear no single piece of evidence. There's nothing. The reality is that there's plenty hidden. These lawsuits just show you the tip of the iceberg, and they're going to say that this is just about, oh, well, this is about solar, not about batteries. They have claimed over and over that their workers who are obviously installing solar are qualified to do this work. Well, clearly, they're not well qualified to do the solar work either. We're not questioning their C46 license to solar. But what we're saying is that their employees and their workers are not trained, and here is evidence of it. It's not protected by UL or by inspection.
Thank you, Bernie. Dave, I'm just going to close, taking about 15 seconds. I want to thank the staff and the registrar for their time. I know this has been a long, drawn-out process. It's taken up, multiple hours at legislative committee meetings and at board meetings, and I know that's tedious, and so we do appreciate your efforts. It started with us believing or coming to the board and trying to get clarification that solar and storage are separate systems. Storage systems are separate systems. They can be tied to multiple sources of generation. And the building codes treat them as such. They treat them as separate systems. We've always argued that the C46 license classifications allows for the installation of solar. It doesn't allow for the installation of storage, but under the incidental supplemental is allowed by the board. I think that's been made very clear by the board's stance, long-standing stance. But to get to the request for information, relevant to the motion, the building and safety codes have staked out a clear delineation where these systems are no longer incidental and supplemental, where they become greater than the solar system they're attached to, and that's at 20 kilowatt hours of storage. We aren't happy with that, but that's what the codes say over and over again, and the codes are very clear. At 20 kilowatt hours of storage, you need to have a qualified individual. The NEC, the California Electrical Code, it's based off that, requires that. So that's to the specific motion where we would draw our line in the sand, is that residential projects over 20 kilowatt hours is where the delineation should be made, and I think we've provided ample evidence with that. Thank you.
Okay, so you're going to receive a summary of this, this meeting. Mike and his staff have their work cut out for them, I think. But once you
David?
receive it, happy to answer any questions.
Registrar vote, I'm sorry. We were given 5 minutes each. I've been timing it. IBEW took 10 and a half minutes. I took 4 minutes and 15 seconds in respect of the process. May I just respond to this significant?
Yeah, just to clarify, though, you
sorry.
each had 10 minutes. I was watching the clock very
okay.
carefully.
I timed it too.
This is pretty significant to just throw in at the very end and not allow
Can
us
you,
to
though,
respond to it.
review it? I haven't had a chance to review it either. Maybe provide a written response. I think that's going to be most helpful for us, if you would be willing to do that.
Do you guys have any idea of the timeline of next steps?
Yeah, for us, the next step is going to be to Mike to review this. It's been recorded, so he has someone that works for him that's going to assist, and she's going to need to review this meeting, and we're going to need to take the highlights of it. We're going to send those out, and you may want to provide a response. But you will have the opportunity, though, if you could, within the next, say, 5 days, to respond to anything that you've heard or received, including this document. We can put that in our report. That would be very helpful. And if you have somebody that would like to serve as a liaison to us for clarification, that would be helpful. It was thrown out that we will have to look at whether there's going to be a cost impact on the public. And so I would probably reach out to you, Brad, if you could help with that, and I'll ask Eddie if he has somebody that could help us, so that at least we have both of your positions on whether there will be a cost impact, and if so, how much.
But do you have any sense of the timing within which you guys are going to come up with proposed?
Yes, I do. If after this meeting, we're going to have a meeting and discuss what we've learned, and our attorney, Christie, is going to weigh in on this. The question is, will we be comfortable in putting together proposed regulatory language by the end of this month? The reality, in answer to your question, is we need to be able to summarize this meeting and come up with proposed regulatory language by the end of October, because we're prepared to have a committee meeting on November the 7th. So that would be our drop dead date. Now, in the event that we can't do that, we'd report back to you, and we would tell you that we may need additional time. I don't know if that's the case, but that would be it. October 30th would be our date. And if you can provide us anything within the next 5 days, that would really be of great assistance. Our goal here is to be as accurate as we possibly can with the fact-finding for this study, and that study will be made public. So again, thank you.